A closed-door bipartisan meeting ended with no deal. The ethics fight that was supposed to be resolved before the Banking Committee markup is now the biggest obstacle standing between this bill and a floor vote. And Morgan Stanley just put a number on what is at stake if it passes. $500 trillion in notional value waiting to migrate on-chain. This is not financial advice. This is for educational and informational purposes only. Do your own research before making any financial decisions. If this kind of coverage is useful to you, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need to see it. Now, let me walk you through exactly what happened and what it means for the thesis you have been holding. The meeting on Tuesday brought together a bipartisan group of senators including Kirsten Gillibrand, Ruben Gallego, Bernie Moreno, and Cynthia Lummis, along with Patrick Witt, the White House Crypto Council Executive Director. According to sources familiar with the discussions, this was the first time this group had reconvened since reaching a tentative ethics agreement ahead of the Senate Banking Committee's markup in May. They left the meeting without a deal. Sources described the state of negotiations as rocky. The group is expected again on Thursday to attempt to break the impasse. To understand why this is happening, you need to understand what the ethics fight is actually about, because it is more specific than most coverage makes it sound. Democrats want strong ethics provisions in the Clarity Act that directly address President Trump's crypto business interests. Reuters has reported that Trump and his family have generated $2.3 billion from crypto-related ventures since returning to office. Democrats' position is straightforward. If Congress is passing landmark legislation that directly benefits the digital asset industry, while the sitting president has a $2.3 billion stake in that industry, there need to be guardrails preventing conflicts of interest. The original tentative agreement that was reached before the Banking Committee markup included a specific enforcement mechanism. State attorneys general would be allowed to sue the Department of Justice if the DOJ failed to enforce certain ethics rules related to the president's crypto interests. In plain English, if the DOJ did not act on a potential ethics violation, a state AG could drag the DOJ into court to force them to. That provision was walked back by Republican members and the White House during Tuesday's meeting. But this is the part almost nobody is connecting. The walkback was not driven purely by partisan interest. There were concerns raised by senators on both sides that this power could be weaponized. The argument made by Republicans and the White House was that the same authority used today against Trump could be used tomorrow by either party to target members of Congress through creative ethics litigation. Legal experts added constitutional concerns. J.W. Verrett, an associate professor at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School, described the idea that state attorneys general could force the Department of Justice to take enforcement action as constitutionally problematic. States can sue the federal government when it acts unconstitutionally, but that is different from states being able to compel federal prosecutorial decisions. As an alternative, Republicans proposed limiting enforcement authority to the U.S. Attorney General and floating impeachment as the ultimate remedy for serious ethics violations. Democrats characterized those offers as an about-face from the tentative agreement reached before the markup. That characterization and the frustration it produced is why participants left the meeting without a resolution. Senator Angela Also Brooks has been direct about her position. She said she will not vote for the Clarity Act on the Senate floor without proper ethics language. She also identified 3 remaining issues beyond ethics. Illicit finance provisions being negotiated by Senator Catherine Cortez Masto and a bipartisan agreement in the Agriculture Committee. She described herself as a former prosecutor who takes seriously the concerns around illicit finance. And she said the negotiations have been conducted in good faith across party lines. Her closing line was measured but clear. She thinks a deal can be reached, but it requires everyone to keep their sleeves rolled up. Because once you understand that the ethics fight is not about whether to pass the Clarity Act, both sides want it passed, It is about the specific mechanism for holding the sitting president's crypto business interests accountable. You stop reading the impasse as a sign the bill is dying. You start reading it as the final negotiation before a deal that both parties have already invested too much to walk away from. Now here is where things get serious for the stakes of getting this resolved. More than 200 companies and organizations, including Ripple, Coinbase, Circle, Kraken, Hedera, Paradigm, and essentially every major name in the crypto and blockchain industry, signed a letter sent to Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, urging them to schedule the Clarity Act for a full Senate floor vote without delay. The letter described the bill as reflecting months of serious bipartisan work and called on the Senate to build on that momentum. That letter represents the industry's collective statement that the political capital invested in this bill is real and that the pressure to deliver a floor vote is not going away. Mike Novogratz weighed in with a similar message. He described himself as still an optimist that the Clarity Act can get over the hill. He said senators from both parties have spent an enormous amount of time on this bill, that it is a very complicated piece of legislation, and that the remaining issues have come down to 2 or 3 where the solution seems fair and good for the country. His timeline was specific. The next 4 weeks is all we have. Then summer recess, then election season. That is the window, 4 weeks. And this is where the story becomes dangerous to dismiss. The $500 trillion figure deserves direct attention because most people covering the space have either dismissed it as hype or accepted it without context. This number comes from Morgan Stanley. It is the firm's estimate of the total notional value of U.S. capital markets that could eventually migrate on-chain under the combined Genius Act and Clarity Act frameworks. That migration, as described by analysts who follow this space, would make the use of public blockchains by regulated intermediaries a matter of public policy for consumer protection, not merely capital markets efficiency. The Genius Act cleared the way for stablecoin regulation. The Clarity Act clears the way for the broader tokenization and digital asset market structure that allows the full range of traditional financial assets to move on-chain. U.S. Treasury bonds, equities, real estate, corporate debt, derivatives, all of it has the potential to be represented as digital tokens that settle in seconds rather than days, trade around the clock, and move across borders without the correspondent banking delays that add cost at every step. Morgan Stanley's $500 is the outer limit of what that migration represents in notional value. Not all of it will migrate immediately. Not all of it will migrate in 5 years. But the direction is established, and the regulatory framework is the prerequisite. Without the Clarity Act, large U.S. banks that want to integrate XRP for cross-border payments cannot proceed with legal certainty. That is not speculation. That is the stated reason for hesitation from multiple institutions that have been running tests and preparing infrastructure, but have held back from full deployment. The Clarity Act removes that hesitation for U.S. regulated institutions. Now, let me bring the XRP-specific picture into focus. Ripple has invested nearly $3 billion in acquisitions since 2023. Medico for custody, Standard Custody for NYDFS compliance, Hidden Road for prime brokerage, now Ripple Prime, Rail for stablecoin-powered B2B payments, G-Treasury for corporate treasury management, Palisade for wallet and custody technology. Each acquisition fills a specific gap in the institutional service stack. Together, they create the end-to-end infrastructure that institutions need to move capital using Ripple's rails. But this infrastructure has been built in anticipation of a regulatory framework that does not yet fully exist. The Clarity Act is that framework. When it passes, the acquisitions stop being investments in future potential and start being operational assets with a clear legal mandate behind them. Treasury processes $13 trillion in payments annually for Fortune 50 and Fortune 500 companies. As of today, none of that uses stablecoins or blockchain rails. Brad Garlinghouse's projection is that 30% of that $13 trillion will be processed on-chain in some form within 5 years. That is $3.9 trillion in payment volume that would migrate from legacy correspondent banking infrastructure to blockchain rails. The Clarity Act is the policy event that makes that migration legally unambiguous for U.S. institutions. But this is the part almost nobody is sitting with. The 3 remaining hurdles Senator Also Brooks identified are worth tracking separately because they each have different resolution timelines and different political dynamics. The ethics provisions are the most publicly contested. The mechanism for accountability around the president's crypto interests is a genuinely novel constitutional question. Both parties agree that guardrails are needed. They disagree on the enforcement mechanism. The state AG authority was too aggressive constitutionally. The impeachment alternative was characterized by Democrats as insufficient. The path forward likely involves a different mechanism that satisfies the constitutional constraint while providing Democrats enough assurance of accountability. What that mechanism looks like is the open question that Thursday's meeting is supposed to address. The illicit finance provisions being negotiated by Senator Cortez Masto are the second hurdle. These address how crypto companies are required to identify and report suspicious transactions to law enforcement. This is an area where crypto companies made substantial concessions in the existing draft, including expanded FinCEN funding, clear obligation for digital asset companies to coordinate information sharing with law enforcement, and anti-evasion language that closes regulatory gaps. Whether the current language satisfies Cortez Masto's requirements determines whether she supports the bill and brings other hesitant Democrats with her. The Agriculture Committee bipartisan agreement is the third hurdle. The Clarity Act has 2 committee jurisdictions: the Banking Committee and the Agriculture Committee. The Banking Committee voted 15-9 with bipartisan support. The Agriculture Committee passed its version 12-11 on a party line vote. Merging those 2 versions into final text requires agreement between the 2 committees, and the Agriculture Committee's narrower bipartisan margin means any change that pushes Republicans away on that committee could lose the majority. And what happens next changes everything for the 60-vote threshold question. The Senate floor requires 60 votes to advance under normal procedures. That means that minimum 7 Democrats need to vote yes alongside the 53-member Republican majority. The bipartisan Banking Committee vote at 15-9, including 2 Democrats, getting to 60 requires more. Senator Also Brooks and Senator Gillibrand, both of whom are active in the negotiations and have expressed support for the bill with the right ethics provisions, represent exactly the Democratic votes the bill needs. Their engagement in the ethics negotiations is not obstruction. It is the process through which the 60-vote coalition is being assembled. When Also Brooks says she thinks the deal can be reached and that everyone needs to keep their sleeves rolled up, she's describing a negotiation she intends to complete, not one she intends to abandon. The same is true of Gillibrand, who has been involved in crypto legislation negotiations for years and has significant institutional knowledge of where the political lines can hold. Now, let me step back and look at what this moment actually represents. The Clarity Act has been in process for years. The House passed its version with 294 votes, including 78 Democrats, in July of last year. The Senate added 33,000 words of text, creating a bill so substantially different from the House version that the House will need to vote on it again before it reaches the president's desk. Every week of delay is another week of political calendar consumed. The 4-week window before summer recess is the most consequential stretch this bill has ever faced. If it reaches the floor before recess with sufficient bipartisan support, it passes. If it stalls into August, Election season dynamics take over, and the probability of passage in the 119th Congress drops significantly. The industry letter signed by 200 companies, Novogratz's public optimism, Lummis's public pressure, and the ongoing closed-door negotiations are all expressions of the same collective understanding. This is the window. Missing it has real costs, not just for the crypto industry, for the United States' competitive position in digital asset regulation globally. Senator Lummis said it plainly. Giving the digital asset industry the common-sense rules it needs to thrive is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It is an American competitive issue. Other countries are not waiting for the U.S. to resolve its ethics negotiations. The window is 4 weeks. After that, summer recess. After that, election season. The next month is the most consequential stretch this bill has ever faced. After everything we covered today, which of the 3 remaining hurdles do you think is the hardest to resolve? The ethics provisions, the illicit finance language, or the Agriculture Committee text? Drop it in the comments. I am genuinely curious where this audience sees the biggest obstacle. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening, go ahead and like it. Subscribe so you do not miss the update when Thursday's meeting produces news. Share this with someone in your circle who saw the "No Deal" headline and concluded the bill is dying. It is not dying. It is in the hardest part of the negotiation. Stay informed. Stay positioned.